welcome to yet another class of EDT830. This is our third class, and today we are going to examine the concept of Introduction to Multimedia Production. It's going to be an interesting class as usual, so let's go to the class. This is lesson 3, and the topic for today is Introduction to Multimedia Production. And by the end of this lesson, I expect you to be able to discuss the concept of multimedia production, analyze 5 critical considerations for effective multimedia production, and explain the strategic importance of audience in multimedia production. Now let's begin by looking at multimedia production. What does it mean? This is the production process that involves various stages ranging from conceptualization to the production of multimedia through the combination of multiple media resources to facilitate teaching learning process. What we are saying is that it is a complex process that ranges from conceptualization. This conceptualization is at the beginning stage when you need to visualize the final output of your production. You have not started at all, but you are visualizing what the final output will look like. And that is where the production stage begins. Multimedia production is a complex procedure that sometimes involves skills and efforts of many experts. In essence, you might not be the only expert, you might not be the only personnel doing multimedia or producing multimedia at a point in time, although we emphasize the need for teachers to produce their multimedia resources themselves. But in some cases, you might need the assistance of other people or other experts in doing this so that you'll be able to achieve the objectives of your lesson. Now, the key to successful multimedia project is allowing students to display their creativity through production of artifacts. And that is why before the end of this course, I will ensure that you are able to produce something in terms of artifacts to show that you have learned something that will be replicated in your various classroom activities to engage your learners in the instructional process. And this multimedia production can be carried out in different phases. And these phases include the pre-production phase, production phase, and post-production phase. And at this production phase now, for instance, you need to plan. It involves planning. You need to conceptualize. Conceptualization meaning that you need to visualize what the multimedia will look like at the end of the production process. Then you need to involve in script writing and storyboarding. In my subsequent video, I will try to distinguish between these two concepts, script writing and storyboarding, because I can see over time that people use the two words interchangeably, and in actual sense, they mean different things. At the production phase, you use the digital tools. This is where the real production occurs. You use the digital tools. You use your computers, you use your cameras, all these resources here. You leverage the capabilities of all these resources that you have here to actually produce your content. Then you have the post-production phase. At the post-production phase, you involve in editing, you do prototyping. Prototyping means you produce a sample of what the multimedia content or the learning material looks like for people to evaluate, for experts to evaluate. So editing, prototyping, delivery are the activities that you need to do or you need to carry out at the post-production phase. Attempt this activity 1 before we move on with our lecture. Now let's quickly consider the considerations for effective multimedia production. There are some basic things you need to consider when you are thinking about producing a multimedia, whether instructional video, whether a graphic representation of anything, whether an audio content or any media production, multimedia production whatsoever. There are some basic things you need to consider, and these are: 1, you need to consider the content. Remember, the multimedia you are trying to produce is not meant for entertainment or for advertisement, for instance. It is meant to deliver instruction. It carries content. Then you ask yourself, what do you want to teach? For instance, as I explained, then how will you teach effectively the content? If it's a practical content, how will you teach that effectively? If it's something that you need to explain, how will you do it? You need to consider that. And that's the first thing you need to consider in the production of multimedia. Another thing is behavioral objectives, or what we call intended learning outcomes. In my subsequent video also, I will make um, uh, a distinction between these two, behavioral objectives and intended learning outcomes, because scholars now believe that it's better we stick to intended learning outcomes that captures the entire competencies, the learning output, the learning outcomes that we want our students to exhibit. These are the skills and knowledge your learners will be able to exhibit after using the multimedia. So if it is a video, for instance, after watching the video, what would they be able to do? You should be able to consider that while you are coming up with your multimedia resources. This will determine the presentation of the content. The behavioral objectives will determine what you now put as the content of the video, or as the content of the audio that you are producing for your students to learn. Then while you are coming up with your behavioral objectives, you need to consider the Bloom's cognitive taxonomy. These are the cognitive abilities identified by Bloom and his team to measure the level of cognitive abilities of students and what they will be able to do after passing through a particular instruction. And this involves knowledge, the comprehension, the application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. These are the 6 cognitive abilities, according to Bloom and his team, that you need to test your students on when you are packaging instructional content for them. But we need to go further. We can do a further categorization of these uh, cognitive abilities. We can have lower order, then we can have higher order cognitive abilities, according to Bloom. Now, the knowledge, comprehension, and application, these 3 cognitive abilities can be categorized as lower order cognitive abilities, whereby you have analysis, synthesis, and evaluation as higher order cognitive abilities. So I'm making this categorization to ensure that at this level of your education, you should be able to move your students beyond these lower order cognitive abilities. Don't restrict your student to this knowledge, comprehension, and application. Let them analyze, let them synthesize, and let them evaluate. Okay, move them to higher order cognitive ability. Test them on these higher order cognitive abilities. You ask me why? Because the 21st century system and their workplaces, your students' workplaces, when they graduate, their workplaces require them to do these higher order thinking skills, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So you need to test them when you are coming up with your multimedia resources. Now let's move to another consideration, which is the audience. You need to consider your students. Your multimedia resources are meant to deliver content to your students. So you need to consider them. It should be noted that the learners are not of the same age and academic abilities. You should consider the fact that you have different categories of learners in your classroom. So the audience is a critical consideration that you need to put at the back of your mind while you are coming up with your multimedia production. Then you need to look at the resources, for instance. The personnel and material resources required in the production of multimedia in teaching and learning should be adequately considered. There is no point going for production of a particular multimedia without having the competencies, without having the required resources to do that. This is quite important. If you don't have the capability, if you don't have the competencies to do or to produce a particular multimedia, then you don't have any point going for that multimedia. You can look for assistance, you can seek assistance from outside. You can look for a way you can get your resources outside, but you should have those resources before you go into the production per se. Then you need to look at the theories and models, because these multimedia resources are meant for teaching learning purposes. They carry content. So the learning theories and models should be used to guide the production of your multimedia element of your multimedia resources. Multimedia production must have a guide from basic theories and models. Basically, a theory provides a general explanation for observations and explains the behavior of individuals. So you need to understand this when you are coming up with your multimedia. Model is also a mental picture that helps you to understand something that we cannot see or experience directly. And let's quickly look at the three main learning theories. There are other theories, of course, but here we are going to just look at the three main theories, which include the behaviorism. Behaviorism believes a change in behavior as the outcome of learning. In essence, this learning theory believes that a change in behavior is a manifestation of the outcome of learning. So if you pass through a particular learning experience, there should be a change in behavior. That is the emphasis, or that is the belief of behaviorism. And this actually emphasizes reinforcement, retention, and transfer of learning, okay, within the instructional process. These are the beliefs of behaviorism. And you can see all this can guide you when you are coming up with your multimedia production. For instance, you need to retain the attention, okay, of your learners. You need to retain their attention. And this will guide you. For instance, if you are coming up with your instructional video, you will be guided in such a way that your instructional video will not be too long to sustain the attention of your learners. Okay, that is how behaviorism can guide you in coming up with your multimedia production. Then we have cognitivism. Cognitivism emphasizes the way brain processes information for learning to take place. And the implication of this is that it encourages the use of different techniques for storing and retrieving information, as well as practice exercise in self-learning materials. So you need to consider this and ensure that you are able to structure your content in such a way that brain will be able to absorb the content and process it easily. Particularly, the information should be chunked properly to promote effective storing of information in the brain. And that is why if you look at your course material, for instance, you will see that the course material is structured in units in such a way that you'll be able to learn in bits and understand the content. This is quite important. And this is how cognitivism can help you or can guide you while you are coming up with the production of multimedia. Then you have constructivism, and that is the last learning theory that we are going to consider here, which should guide you when you are coming up with your multimedia production. The emphasis of constructivism is on open-ended learning experience, where learners are able to interact with the environment and resources. Learning occurs when it is situated, when it is contextual, problem-based, social, and authentic. All these terms will help you in coming up with a realistic and engaging multimedia content. For instance, your learning content should be contextual. You should look for learning resources that will explain uh, the concept in such a way that learners will be able to relate with their environment. So you look for local materials, for instance, you look for resources within your environment that learners will be able to relate with perfectly well. Okay, so these are the ways these learning theories can help you in coming up with multimedia production. Thank you for watching. See you in the next class.